On January 18, 2020, Christine Gauci was in a state of panic in an underwater cave in the picturesque water of Malta. The 35-year-old technical diver, scuba instructor, free diver, and Afghanistan veteran had trapped her scuba fin into a fishing net, and her longtime dive partner, Arthur Castillo, was desperately trying to free her. What happened next left many unanswered questions, and the case only got more perplexing when Arthur Castillo would be charged with involuntary homicide subsequent to a comprehensive post-accident analysis conducted by the Maltese police. This story may have the most twists, turns, and controversies we've ever covered on this channel. This is the story of Christine Gauci. Our story begins on a small archipelago located in the central Mediterranean Sea named Malta. While Malta is one of the smallest nations in the world, it is also one of the most densely populated. It is only 122 square miles or 316 square kilometers, and it is entirely made up of sedimentary rock and is dominated by one thing. You guessed it, water. The history of the island is filled with conflict. It was a major battleground for war within the Mediterranean Sea, but today, the 500,000 residents live a peaceful life. There are two islands that make up the nation, the larger island of Malta and the smaller Gozo. The larger island is more developed today and boasts a greater number of attractions, while Gozo offers a more relaxed and natural feel. With water surrounding the two islands, it has become a hotspot for tourists, as there are many sightseeing, scuba diving, or even cave diving areas. And this is why Christine Gauci would become infatuated with being in the water at such a young age. Born on September 3, 1985, Christine was described as a sincere, energetic, and adventurous woman. She grew up always interested in spending her free time outside exploring and just simply enjoying the outdoors. In 2005, she shattered expectations by becoming the sole woman accepted into Malta's elite armed forces. Despite facing a setback due to a knee injury during basic training, her determination prevailed. After recovering, Christine pushed through and successfully completed the recruitment process, but she wasn't done. Setting her sights even higher, she aspired to serve in the British Army. After enduring a challenging 6-month selection process in the UK, she excelled in basic training, specializing in air defense. Christine's training led her to the Minden Battery 12th Regiment Royal Artillery, where she honed her skills and would climb the ranks. Her dedication and expertise earned her a deployment to Afghanistan in 2011, where she proudly received the prestigious Afghanistan Medal for completion of her tour of duty. Upon returning to Malta in 2012, after her deployment, she re-enlisted in the Armed Forces of Malta. Facing a fresh set of challenges, Christine took on responsibilities at Malta International Airport, which included training and compass searches on female personnel and vehicles, VIP protection, and rapid response to aircraft incidents. But something was missing. You see, Christine desperately wanted to use her talents and abilities in the one place she felt most comfortable: the water. Because of her passion for diving, she nurtured a strong desire to embark on a career in underwater bomb disposal. But there was one problem. She would have to pass the incredibly demanding B3 diving course offered by the Explosive Ordnance Depot. If she were to pass, she would etch her name into history again, as she would become the first female member of the esteemed EOD unit. On the crisp morning of January 18, 2020, Christine would meet up with her longtime dive partner, Arthur Castillo, on the south side of Gozo, in a bay called Mgarr-xi-xini. She had driven south along a windy road overlooking the valley until she reached a small clearing near the edge of the water, a perfect parking spot, as it was close enough to carry their gear easily to the edge of the bay. The duo would then meet up with the rest of their group, consisting of 4 divers, bringing the total number to 6. The water that morning was calm and absolutely breathtaking. It looked like a postcard that you send your buddy while on vacation. The plan was to follow the slope of the bay until they reached the open sea. The slope starts gently at 6 meters, then 10, 14, and eventually 70 meters. After reaching the sea, they would swim west to the Tarshan Temple's sinkhole, and then swim through 2 small ocean caverns that were often visited by divers. But before beginning the trek into the water, Christine would admit to Arthur that she had been awake for 24 hours preceding the dive due to a long work shift. For that reason, Arthur's girlfriend had attempted to talk her out of the dive, but Christine dismissed the suggestion, stating that she had completed many dives after a night shift before, and the cold water would revitalize her senses. At around 8:30 a.m., the group would set out, with Arthur pairing up with Christine as her dive buddy, something they had done many times before. Christine was equipped with an open-circuit back-mounted double and a decompression tank of 50% oxygen, while Arthur was diving a closed-circuit rebreather. They were planning mandatory decompression stops during the approximately 28-meter or 92-foot dive. The most concerning factor of the dive was that Christine was using a dry suit that was too big for her, causing it to trap too much air, meaning buoyancy could become a problem. On top of this, Christine had not been trained on how to use a dry suit and was simply unfamiliar with it, but none of these factors would stop her. Arthur and Christine would grab their gear and make their way into the water, walking into the bay off the gradual slope. Almost immediately after the dive started, the issues would begin. Between 16 to 18 meters, Christine was already struggling with her buoyancy, and Arthur would have to dump gas, which means he would assist in removing the excess air that was building in her dry suit. This would improve her buoyancy for a short period of time, but it was more of a band-aid fix rather than a real solution. This was why Arthur would recommend they abort the dive at this depth, but Christine would quickly signal for them to continue. After arriving at a depth of 28 meters, Arthur would once again have to assist Christine by holding her down and releasing gas from her buoyancy device. Now, when someone typically experiences buoyancy issues on a dive, it doesn't just magically go away. In fact, it typically only worsens throughout the dive. After reaching their target depth of 28 meters, the duo would make their way over to a small cave, but after swimming through, Christine's scuba fin would become entangled in a small fishing net. Christine, being an expert diver, understood that she had to remain calm, but what made this difficult was how much she was struggling with her buoyancy after getting her flipper entangled. She began to panic, because she knew that being in a cave was very different from open water. The walls, the silt, the lack of light, all of these factors made her situation more dangerous. Arthur would slowly make his way over to Christine, and signaling for her to remain calm, he would slowly pull out a small knife and begin cutting away at the net. Within minutes, Christine was free. Once again, Arthur would signal they end their dive, but Christine was set on continuing. Following the exit from the cave, Arthur directed that they should ascend to a shallower depth for the return swim to shore, but as they arrived at 15 meters or 49 feet, Christine would once again suffer buoyancy issues. She was struggling to stay in depth because her suit was filling with air. This meant she felt like she was being dragged towards the surface. But without the proper decompression stops, Christine could put herself into serious danger, as the nitrogen that has accumulated in her blood would not be able to dissolve. Basically, if she could not control her buoyancy, she could lose her life. Arthur would remove 2-kilogram weights from his own suit and attach it to Christine to help, but it would prove to be insufficient. In a last-ditch effort, Arthur would wrap his arms around a heavy rock, lift it, then hand it to Christine. Finally, after she took the rock, Arthur expressed the need to end the dive, but it seemed even with his added urgency, Christine was still set on continuing. What happened next is unclear, but Arthur would look away from Christine for a few seconds, and after he looked back at where she was just moments before, she was gone. He watched as the rock she had been holding plummeted to the ocean floor, but he could do nothing. Arthur would immediately begin his ascent with the intention of completing a 2-minute mandatory decompression stop at 5 meters. However, that proved impossible due to him giving Christine 2 of his weights. Once Arthur surfaced, he would spot another diver exiting the water and wearing a similar dry suit to his own. He immediately let out a sigh of relief, thinking it was Christine, but after swimming towards them, his heart sunk. It was not his diving partner. After arriving on shore, another diver would ask Arthur about Christine, and that is when his suspicion would be confirmed. She had not returned. They would wait 5 minutes, and then they would call the emergency number. There was a group of divers already on the surface, so rescue efforts would kick off immediately, some divers swimming back into the bay while others began walking along the water's edge looking for any sign of Christine. According to an expert witness, the assumption that Christine was safe on the surface and swimming back to shore when no such contact and reasoning was made between the two divers proved to be highly significant, as this led to the omission of a timely rescue attempt during the critical initial minutes. It didn't take long until they found her. Christine was noticed floating face down by the shore. After removing her body from the water, they would notice that she had bloodshot eyes and blood frothing from her mouth. It was noted that there was no air left in her tanks. The exact circumstances of her passing would remain a mystery, but there were 3 theories: insufficient weighting or decompression, gas depletion that would have forced an emergency ascent, or as highlighted by an expert, a cardiac arrhythmia might have triggered a sudden shortness of breath, compelling Christine to instinctively ascend rapidly to the surface in search of air. After her death, Arthur would be immediately investigated and charged with involuntary homicide. Despite several attempts by Arthur to help Christine during the dive, the magistrate of Gozo wrote that he had failed to provide appropriate assistance during the final part of the dive. It was learned that Arthur had failed to check Christine's gas levels during the last 25 minutes of the dive, and he had even witnessed her grasping her nitrox 50% decompression cylinder towards the end of the dive, but had not investigated her behavior. Because of this, Arthur would be found guilty, meaning he would be held responsible for Christine's death. Arthur's conviction would understandably create outrage within the diving community, with many blogs and articles discussing the events and stating that this would create a precedent that would lead other divers to consider diving without buddies for fear of being punished for a mistake. But there was no community that was more hurt than the Maltese scuba divers. The events would obviously affect tourism and scuba diving in the area, but I think we can all agree that one of those hurt the most is Arthur. An experienced diver would lose his friend right in front of his eyes after he had made several attempts to help her, then be convicted for her death. On February 22nd, 2023, the Court of Criminal Appeals would review Arthur's case, and they would eventually clear him of all criminal responsibility for Christine's death, ruling that he had done everything he could have reasonably been expected to do in the circumstances. In her ruling, Justice Consuelo Herrera said that while the buddy system was used by divers to ensure assistance was available during a dive, it did not mean that divers are responsible for each other's actions. Justice Herrera ruled that Arthur had not been in any way negligent in his actions, and said that arterial narrowing, which was discovered during Christine's autopsy, was not foreseeable. The court also noted, while Arthur had come to Christine's aid several times during the dive, had he tried to follow her during the final rapid ascent, there may have been 2 fatalities, not 1. This decision rapidly made its way through the diving community, leaving a sigh of relief in its wake. Many thought this was the correct decision, and while Arthur was not perfect, charging him for involuntary homicide felt like a stretch to the community. Arthur would watch his friend die in front of him, then be faced with defending his own life. At the end of the day, there really is no winners in this story. Someone's name was dragged through the mud, and a diver lost her life, something that nobody can ever change.